Hello students, today we are going to start our next chapter. The name of the chapter is The Interview, written by Christopher Sylvester. This chapter is an excerpt of the book The Penguin Book of Interviews, edited by Christopher Sylvester. First of all, we will read about Christopher Sylvester, who was born in 1959 and he was a student of history at Peterhouse, Cambridge. He was a reporter for Private Eye for 10 years and has written features for Vanity Fair. Following is an excerpt taken from his introduction to the Penguin Book of Interviews, an anthology from 1959 to the present day. There are two parts in this chapter. Today we will study first part of this chapter. Let's start. The chapter starts with the author introducing us to the method of an interview. Let's start. Since its invention a little over 130 years ago, the interview has become a commonplace of journalism. Today, almost everybody who is literate will have read an interview at some point in their lives. While from the other point of view, several thousand celebrities have been interviewed over the years, some of them repeatedly. What is commonplace? Commonplace means common. Interview, an important part of journalism that was discovered over 130 years ago. In fact, people who are educated are believed to have read an interview at one or other point in their lives, and on the other hand, almost every celebrity has been interviewed more than once. जो भी जितने भी सेलिब्रिटीज़ होते हैं सबके इंटरव्यूज़ होते हैं और हर एक जो कि एजुकेटेड है अपनी लाइफ में कभी ना कभी ज़रूर इंटरव्यू रीड करता है. लेट्स रीड फर्दर. सो इट इज़ hardly surprising that opinions of the interview, of its functions, method and merits vary considerably. Since it is very commonly used, it is not unbelievable that many people have conflicting views. Conflicting means उनका एक पॉजिटिव व्यूज़ नहीं होते इंटरव्यू के लिए, बिकॉज इसके जो यूजेस होते हैं और जिसके एडवांटेजेस हैं डिसएडवांटेजेस होते हैं इंटरव्यू के लिए वेरी करता है people to people, place to place. Some might make quite extravagant claims for it as being in its highest form a source of truth and in its practice an art. Extravagant means exceeding reasonable bounds. कुछ लोग जो इसको एक बाउंडिंग मानते हैं, एक हाईएस्ट फॉर्म मानते हैं कि ये हमें सच्चाई बताता है इंटरव्यूअर की. Others, usually celebrities who see themselves as its victims, might despise the interview as an unwarranted intrusion into their lives or feel that it somehow diminishes them. Just as in some primitive cultures, it is believed that if one takes a photographic portrait of somebody, then one is stealing that person's soul. Despise means dislike. Intrusion means causing disruption or annoyance, किसी चीज़ से चिढ़ जाना. And diminishes means primitive culture, that means relating to an early or original stage or state. Some people have elaborative claims about its goodness as they believe it to be a path towards knowing complete truth and consider its practice to be an art. If it looked at from the interview's point of view, it may look like an unwanted intervention in their personal lives, or it steals the original identity of the person. V.S. Naipaul feels that some people are wounded by interviews and lost a part of themselves. Lewis Carroll, the creator of Alice in Wonderland, was said to have had a just horror of the interviewer, and he never consented to be interviewed. Who was V.S. Naipaul? He was known as a cosmopolitan writer. In his travel books, and in his documentary work is presents his impression of the country of his ancestors, that is India. He received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2001. According to the interviewer, many famous personalities have a bad impression in their minds about interviews. यहाँ पे V.S. नाइपाल जो है, he feels that a bad interview can leave a person wounded for life. एक Lewis Carroll, who was a creator of Alice in Wonderland, never consented to be interviewed. उनको कभी भी interview देना पसंद नहीं रहा, as he was too scared of the interviewer. जो interviewer होते थे उनसे वो बहुत डरते थे. Why it was so? It was his horror of being lionized which made him thus repel would-be acquaintances, interviewers, and the president petitioners for his autograph, and he would afterwards relate the stories of his success in silencing all such people with much satisfaction and amusement. Here Lewis Carroll, he feared that a lot of attention would be dreamed towards him, and thus he remained away from who wanted to interview him or get an autograph of his. He would narrate tales of his success at avoiding such requests with satisfaction and enjoyment. He preferred to narrate stories rather than to interview. Rudyard Kipling expressed an even more condemnatory attitude towards the interviewer. Who is Rudyard Kipling? A prolific writer who was known as the poet of the common soldier. Kipling's Jungle Book, which is a story of Kimball O'Hara and his adventures in the Himalayas, is considered as a classic all over the world. He was the writer of Jungle Book, Rudyard Kipling. उनका point of view क्या था? He was strongly against the idea of taking interview. His wife Caroline writes in her diary for 14th October 1892 that their day was wrecked by two reporters from Boston. His wife recorded one such incident in her diary when their day in Boston was ruined by two reporters. What happened? She reports her husband as saying to the reporters, "Why do I refuse to be interviewed? Because it is immoral. It is a crime, just as much of a crime as an offense against my person as an assault, and just as much merits punishment." Immoral means sin or crime, as an assault means violent physical attack. She also made an account of why her husband refused to appear for an interview. According to him, interviews are immoral, and he calls interviewing a crime which should attract punishment just as any other crime. उनका मानना था कि इंटरव्यू जो है वो एक क्राइम है, उनके लिए भी पनिशमेंट होनी चाहिए जैसे दूसरे क्राइम्स के लिए होती है. इट इज़ काउडली एंड वाइल. वाइल मीन्स disgusting. No respectable man would ask it, much less give it, yet Kipling had himself perpetrated such an assault on Mark Twain only a few years ago. He thought that it is an extremely unpleasant experience and no man with self-respect would ask or consent to it. जिस इंसान में सेल्फ रिस्पेक्ट नहीं है वो इंटरव्यू देता है. अकॉर्डिंग टू हिम, आयरॉनिकली किपलिंग वंस कैरिड अ सच असॉल्ट. अब जो किपलिंग है वो बताते हैं कि सेम इंसिडेंट उनके साथ भी हुआ था ऐसा असॉल्ट. मार्क ट्वेन सम ईयर अर्लियर, जो कि मार्क ट्वेन ने कुछ साल पहले उनका इंटरव्यू लिया था. H.G. Wells in an interview in 1894 referred to the interviewing ordeal, but was a fairly frequent interviewee, and 40 years later found himself interviewing Joseph Stalin. Saul Bellow, who has consented to be interviewed on several occasions, nevertheless once described interviews as being like thumbprints on his windpipe. Who was H.G. Wells? And he was an English novelist, journalist, socialist and historian. He is known for his work of science fiction. Wells' best known book are The Time Machine, उनकी बेस्ट बुक थी, द इनविजिबल मैन एंड द वॉर ऑफ द वर्ल्ड्स, ये सारी उनकी राइटिंग्स थी. द फेमस इंग्लिश novelist and journalist H.G. Wells said that an interview was an unpleasant experience, but 40 years later he interviewed the Russian revolutionary Joseph Stalin. पहले उनका भी मानना था कि इंटरव्यू जो है वो अच्छा नहीं होता, अनप्लेजेंट होता है, बट कुछ टाइम के बाद उन्होंने खुद इंटरव्यू लिया. उन्होंने किसका? जोसेफ स्टालिन. जोसेफ स्टालिन कौन है? अ ग्रेट रशियन रेवोल्यूशनरी एंड एन एक्टिव पॉलिटिकल ऑर्गेनाइजर. नेक्स्ट, सॉल बेलो, a playwright as well as a novelist. Bellow's works were influenced widely by World War II. Among his most famous characters are Augie, March and Moses. He published short stories translated from Yiddish. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1976. Who has consented to be interviewed? Saul Bellow concentrated that an interview seemed to be like fingertips on his windpipe, which means that he felt choked and suffocated when he sat for one. जब वो इंटरव्यू के लिए बैठते थे तो उनको ऐसी फीलिंग आती थी कि उनको सफोकेशन हो रही है, उनको विंड पाइप पे जैसे कोई प्रेस कर रहा हो विंड पाइप को. Yet, despite the drawbacks of the interview, it is an supremely serviceable medium of communication. Serviceable means useful. Despite the drawbacks of the interview, it seemed to fulfill its purpose of communicating with the audience. These days, more than at any other time, our most vivid impression of our contemporaries are through interviews. Dennis Bryan was written. Interviews. Dennis Bryan was written. Vivid means clear image of mind. Contemporary means people living at the same time. According to Davis, an interview gives us the most clear impression of the people of our time. Almost everything of moment reaches us through one man asking questions of another. Because of this, the interviewer holds a position of unprecedented power and influence. Unprecedented means never done or known before. इससे पहले जिसके बारे में कुछ मालूम ना हो. A interview of man which was asking questions from the other interviewee gives him power and influence. जो इंटरव्यू देता है वो इंटरव्यूअर को बहुत इन्फ्लुएंस देता है, वो पावर देता है उसको अपने उसके बारे में क्वेश्चनिंग करने के लिए, उसके बारे में पब्लिकली सब कुछ पूछने के लिए. This is all about today. Next part we will study in next lecture.